Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. So my name is Shannon Garden-Smith, she, her, hers pronouns. Yeah, really kind of broadly speaking, my background is kind of Scottish, Irish heritage, so I am a settler on these lands. I'm an artist. I've been based in Toronto, in Tkaronto, for most of my adult life. So I came here to do my undergrad at U of T, left for a little bit of time, did an MFA at the University of Guelph. And now I'm currently connected with York University with doctoral studies. I often say that I work in sculpture and installation, which is true. But I also kind of think, I suppose that I approach my work in a way where I'm not bound to kind of. I've been thinking about the ways that exactly trained in sculpture sort of proper. And in a lot of ways, I think about how it's been important that I sort of approach things in the wrong way. And I'm like really excited and reclaiming that idea of wrongness, because I think there's so much kind of potential in that. And it maybe allows you to approach materials and thinking and making in a way that can be, I think, freer sometimes. And I often, I'm not the first person to do this. I'm not the first artist to do this. I think there's really like a long, amazing lineage of artists that I look to. And I think especially about a lot of artists, often from the 20th century, oftentimes women or female identifying artists who were working in kind of very materially experimental ways. And so I think about like Eva Hesse, I think about Swiss artist Heidi Bucher, I think about Senga Nangudi, and right now I'm thinking a lot about the artist Cecilia Vicuna. And I mention that because I think that they really sort of model for me this approach to working in a really kind of expansive material realm. Yeah, no, great question. Maybe picking up on what I was talking about in the introduction with naming some of these artists that, have really helped open up a way of working for me. Also, I'm really interested in them in this way that they're often highlighting, I think, invisibilized aspects of our world that are sort of totally written into the everyday. And by that I mean they're often kind of opening up a way for us to understand the ways that certain kinds of labor, the ways that certain kinds of materials, certain people, and their work become invisibilized, but are absolutely kind of central to holding up all of our systems. So this kind of idea of the way that, so-called like productive work, or just the ways that we kind of like move through the world, are actually underwritten by all of this kind of work that is really kind of specifically invisibilized. And I think that a lot of those practices do that. And I would say that, that's often kind of an intersectional feminist framework. Maybe those artists weren't necessarily thinking exactly in those terms. But I really pick up on that a lot in my work more broadly, where I'm kind of thinking about questions of invisibilization, or the ways that kind of certain things are made to both disappear or to become kind of naturalized through a kind of repetition. But they're not, they don't inherently need to be that way. And yeah, so with this work specifically, with Blinds 2, I'm kind of wrestling a lot with some of those questions around maybe invisibility, or actually sort of denying looking in a way. I mean, you think about just the kind of basic construction of a window blind, which these are sort of modeled after. They're a very kind of eccentric window blind kind of sculpture. Of course, a window blind, the very name, the blind, is kind of meant to sort of block off vision in a way. And so, often when I'm developing work, it sort of slowly unfolds over time, and I don't necessarily go into something knowing exactly what it's going to be. So the intent is sort of unfolds along with a lot of material experimentation. And I would say that this work really kind of came out of some sort of previous bodies of work where I was specifically working with the material of gelatin. And gelatin as in like kind of food grade gelatin, the kind of gelatin that you would make food out of. And I started working with this material, I'd say I had been working with it many years before and not quite knowing yet how it might really kind of enter into my work more fully. But over the pandemic, I was, like all of us, I was sort of really forced to kind of reorient my life and where I was working. So I was working from home and making from home. And some of the materials that I had been working with, previously in a kind of dedicated studio space didn't feel safe to be working with in my home. So in part, it sort of came out of this specific context of, again, working at home. But I came in with a certain kind of intent that then was like totally reoriented through my work with the material. And my intent was that I thought that this would be a material that would easily break down. It's something you consume. It's something that kind of goes through our digestive tracts. And so I had this feeling that I might be able to sort of work with this material that in many ways, I think when people see this work and other bodies of work that I've made working with gelatin, they don't immediately know what the material is. They think maybe it's glass. They think maybe it's an acrylic, something like this. And it has all of those properties. It has this kind of ability to have transparency, this kind of levels of opacity, or like acrylics. It has this kind of ability to be, you sort of begin by working with it in a liquid state. It's able to kind of hold other materials within itself. And then I developed this way of working where I would sort of dry it over time. So I started working with it because I thought I could make sculptures that would be really quite ephemeral, and that maybe I would have them interacting with the weather in a way, and that they would change. And that is both true and untrue. So as I worked more and more with the material, I realized that yes, it has this kind of inherent capacity for change, like even once I've worked with it and I've sort of developed it into a certain form, that there is capacity for it to change. But it also really kind of thwarted my expectations and was so much more kind of robust and strong. And so I feel like it really is both, in previous bodies of work, I've maybe especially worked with kind of using gelatin to sort of create, I created these kind of lampshade-like forms, and the gelatin, I almost think of it as like an eggshell. There's something where it's kind of making this surface. And of course we think about an eggshell and we think about its fragility, but also eggs are at the same time very robust, like a kind of incredible material technology that can do both things. And so I discovered this, and I also sort of began to think about the ways that gelatin actually has this whole kind of, I'm thinking about it in terms of a kind of history of food. It's a material that comes from animal body. Like gelatin is the kind of in-between bits in an animal body, cartilage and ligaments and these kind of elements of the body. But I also began to realize as I was working with it more and kind of researching a little bit more deeply that it has this whole life in image making. And those who, I'm not an expert in sort of the history of photography, but it was really interesting to me to think about the ways that actually gelatin has been kind of really central to the ways that we've developed images, especially the kind of way that photography really starts to proliferate and becomes sort of easier in some ways to do. And partially that's because we have, many different kinds of technologies of photography, but we have like the silver gelatin print, for example, that's developed. And gelatin there plays this kind of really critical role where the image is kind of able to be suspended but fixed. And I find, thinking about that really interesting and really sort of generative for my practice, because I sort of told you that I began working with gelatin because I thought it would break down. I'm very interested in unfixing things across a lot of my work. Materials are changing. I'm often sort of setting up scenarios where maybe a visitor comes into an installation and kind of disrupts a kind of carefully made work, which is sort of, for me, the work itself. And so I'm often kind of interested in these different processes by which the work is not stable, it's not a monument. It really does have this kind of relationship to time and to change in the ways that our bodies do. So that was really exciting to me, to kind of discover that the material was kind of quite contradictory, that it had this sort of function both in a way where it's being consumed, can easily break down, but then it's kind of had this like life also in fixing images in archives, which I find really exciting. I've been reading a really brilliant kind of piece of scholarship by an academic, Siobhan Angus, called Camera Geologica, and she briefly kind of talks about the role, that gelatin has had in image making, and how specifically like Kodak, when they were really kind of developing and mass marketing photography and also working in film, there was this sort of scenario where some film that was made had this kind of milky quality, and the image was quite kind of not pristine. It was not a kind of perfect technical image, and no one could figure out what was going on with this film. And it was only years later that scientists figured out that actually the cows from which the gelatin comes need to sort of eat this certain like amount of mustard seed or something. So there's this kind of really amazing, specific relationship to consuming certain foods and certain materials that also come from the land that end up being really kind of critical in the kind of chemical makeup of this material that then is kind of able to hold image. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. But yeah, with this work, so working with the kind of gelatin pieces that came out of other previous work, I had kind of started working, making these kind of smaller blinds, eccentric blinds sculptures, and also bringing those together with this kind of process of image making that is called marbling. So this kind of process of making prints called marbling. And for me, there are a lot of connections across all of these materials, but I'll tell you really briefly a little bit about marbling, because the work that is here at Onsite, these works are made of gelatin, and when you see them in the space, you see that they have a really kind of rich color to them. They're sort of there's a kind of translucency a little bit to them, but this kind of like deep kind of color. And as you move closer to them, you see that there's a kind of pattern that is repeating across each of these kinds of slats, if you will, in the kind of eccentric window blinds. And so, with this work, I'm working with gelatin, and I'm also, in this work specifically, fusing these marbling patterns to the gelatin itself. So it's actually, I've kind of been thinking about it almost like it's tattooed into the kind of skin of the gelatin. But briefly about marbling, this kind of really incredible process that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and is a kind of printmaking technology that has a lot of different kind of origin points. There are sort of many different cultures that have a kind of version of marbling. A lot of, whenever I'm sort of reading things about the history of marbling, people always want to sort of pinpoint an origin, but it seems that, and there certainly have been cultures that have been working with it for a long, long time. But it seems that it sort of has kind of emerged in multiple places across time. And it's this kind of technology basically of taking water, thickening that water in a way, making it almost a little bit, not quite like jelly, but sort of moving in that direction. And I think there's this kind of material relationship with the gelatin. Again, it's this kind of material that kind of passes through that material state. But in marbling, you thicken this water bath and you flick pigments onto the water bath, which is thickened so that the pigments kind of stay on the surface of the water. It's really kind of magical. And then you can, you treat paper in a certain way, and you can set down the paper and pick up this print. Or you can manipulate the pigments that are on top of the water further with a stylus or a comb or some kind of tool that's moving through the water. And in a way, then, I find this really exciting because it's a kind of way of making images or prints that kind of really comes out of movement. It really is sort of coming in a way from the body. I've started to think about how these prints are, it's almost like a choreography that's being performed. Every time there's certain sort of sets of patterns that exist. And, as I've mentioned, with the ways that this technology has kind of come out of multiple cultures across time, including from Japan, including from, what would be like modern day Iran or Turkey, and other places as well. What's interesting is that for me, there's also a kind of connection with the way that this kind of technology starts to really proliferate and circulate is absolutely related to kind of colonial imperial impulses that are coming from the West and that are coming from Europe in particular. So Europeans see this technology and they become fascinated with it because it's incredible, but they take it and they start to really adopt this kind of pattern making process, and it's used especially in the 19th century in books. So there are these kind of end papers in books. So that's where the marbling comes from. But as you can see, for me, it has a kind of another relationship to kind of thinking about, processes of movement or a kind of vitality or openness, both in material, but also in kind of image making. So to think about it as a kind of like record of a dance, I think is, again, a really generative thing for me. I'd love to tell you a bit more about some of the other aspects of making this work. Specifically, as you spend time with the work at on-site, you will sort of begin to notice that there are little kind of pieces of jewelry that are embedded in the gelatin and in the kind of the marbled gelatin. And this is a really kind of central part of this work and more broadly my practice. So these pieces of jewelry I've gathered kind of slowly over time from friends and acquaintances and other people that I've just gotten connected with who've heard about my kind of call. And it's this kind of process of gathering material or collecting material that for me, it kind of embeds the material that I'm working with in another set of relationships. There's a way that I can't simply kind of go out and buy these things. I mean, I could, but I choose not to. And so working with jewelry that I've collected from people is really interesting because there's a kind of real sense of intimacy with something like jewelry. Again, it's something that you wear on your body. It's like right kind of next to your skin. I also love to think about it as like a kind of mini sculpture. I mean, that's what jewelry is. It also, of course, is a material. It is made of metal. And thinking back to, for example, the silver gelatin prints or Siobhan Angus's work around, just kind of thinking through the sort of levels of extraction that are embedded in kind of image making. There is that is at play with jewelry as well. That this is metal that is coming from the earth, and then it has this kind of these histories of having like lived with someone and having been on their body. And oftentimes people are really excited to kind of give some discarded jewelry over because they don't quite know what to do with it because it has this kind of like special charge almost. And so I think this is a lovely way then to kind of take a material that is then kind of embedded. It kind of like brings all of that history with it, all of that kind of relationship to other people and places and the everyday. And then it really kind of embeds it into the sculpture itself. And that's a process that is often kind of central to my making, where I'm kind of slowly gathering things. It's difficult, it's arduous, but it's also this way for me in a kind of practice of making. I often joke that I just want to talk to people. I also love to work with material, but it becomes this amazing way to kind of bring that into my kind of practice of making, and also to kind of think about like what are the ethics of working with any material. That's just something that's always in question, and so this is a way for me to kind of navigate some of those questions. Well, I feel in a way that I always have to kind of think about maybe the previous iteration of this work, and the curator, Avalon Mott, I think has done a really beautiful job of putting together this show that is kind of really thinking about addressing memory. I think is kind of broadly what's happening across our work in the show. And so, initially I made this work for a specific context. I made it to fit exactly in these kind of beautiful, massive archways that exist at the University of Toronto, specifically University College, right where the art museum is. And so I was really kind of thinking about the work was going to be in that context where it's actually a kind of semi-outdoor situation. And that was very purposeful. It was made so that, as I spoke about earlier, that these works would be outside and they would change somewhat over the course of the exhibition. Because gelatin, I think about it a lot, almost just like paper. If you can imagine, if you were to put paper in a kind of outside, or in a really kind of like in a kind of circumstance where the conditions are really fluctuating, it's going to change, it's going to curl, it's going to absorb water, and gelatin works in that way as well. So the very form of it really kind of changed and really kind of holds the kind of memory of the weather when it was first installed for this kind of specific location. But the jewelry pieces, specifically, and the way that they're kind of interacting with the kind of rich colors of the historical marbling print that I've worked with, they become these kind of points of, again, there's a kind of intimacy of looking. I think they kind of beckon you in closer. And I also think that, the way that the kind of blinds work have changed over the course of that kind of first exhibition, and I should thank curator Erin Storis for the opportunity to show the work in that context. Now that the works have sort of changed form so much that I don't think you can even possibly see all of these kind of little pieces that are embedded. So it becomes this kind of, I think everyone has a slightly sort of different experience of how they're viewing the work, and these kind of moments of something coming into view. But I sort of like the idea that you can't really, I don't know that you can take in the work all at once, because there are just kind of more and more details that unfold, or that you sort of see a moment where another piece is kind of hidden away. I like to think of them as like little secrets inside of the work. But yeah, in that context, there was semi-outdoors, and the kind of sunlight, of course, is a factor. And so, they become little points of punctuation almost in the work. And I think, again, like functioning here at Onsite, we're in this kind of beautiful space with this kind of incredible street level window. So we have kind of the same, similar conditions where the works get to kind of really change over the course of every day, as the light is actually kind of moving through the space. So, yeah. Yeah, the works like necessarily kind of exist in space. I'm often interested in working with surfaces. I'm often interested in working with the surfaces of our built world. And I think about, blinds are this kind of the way they materially function is as a kind of surface in space and a kind of threshold, right? But it's a kind of surface that is very porous. So I think that, they really kind of invite viewers into kind of inhabiting the space, or maybe looking at the space also in a different way, where there's a kind of strangeness of like, it's weird to look at a blind. You're not meant to. It's not something that you're meant to really kind of focus on. And so you're looking at this sculpture that is a blind, looking at the surface that you're not really supposed to. And for me, that also really relates back to the marbling, where it's kind of existing, especially in these like 19th century books. It's kind of, it's very present. The marbling is very present, but it's not the content of the book. It's kind of strangely, again, holding this kind of contradictory space around. It's not really the main thing that you're supposed to be focused on, and yet it is kind of so present and visible. And yeah, I think blinds kind of function. I'm quite interested in like using this form for all those contradictions that it brings up. And so of course, like as people are moving through the space, the work is also on a scale that it's quite immersive. Like it's you can kind of move up into the works, and they have this kind of there's this kind of form where they're almost like an embrace or something, and so there's a kind of like invitation, I think, into the work, and I think it just kind of changes how you of course it necessarily changes how you move through the space, what is visible, what isn't. I mean, I'm here in this show paired with beautiful work by Nabil, and it's interesting the ways that our works are kind of playing off of one another, the ways that sometimes you can look through my work to see Nabil's work. I really love that idea that even in looking at a work, you're sort of you're looking at something else, you're looking at more. It's inflected with context. So yeah, that's a little bit how I think about the ways that people might be kind of interacting with the environment that they create. Yeah, this is really central to everything. So, I spoke earlier about some of kind of who I see as like my artistic influences, and I think a lot about kind of intersectional feminist frameworks and methods that, often kind of bring our attention to what is invisibilized, what is devalued, and what is also kind of naturalized, right? So certain forms of labor, certain bodies who perform that labor. And I think that, at its very best, a kind of robust intersectional feminist framework actually allows us to kind of get outside of what are the kind of existing possibilities in our world, right? If we could sort of take things for granted, or we kind of see things as this is the natural way that things work, then this kind of offers us, it sort of allows us to see what's been invisibilized, or more so to sense what's been invisibilized, and that's incredibly powerful. And I continue to think that that's like one of the things that artworks can do sort of best. Is to maybe like re-sensitize us to the world, so that we can really imagine other kind of possibilities for how we might approach material, how we might approach actual modes of relation, how we actually like live our lives on a kind of day-to-day level. And I've also really been thinking about, and not just thinking about, like really trying to enact and embody a kind of approach to material that comes out of land-based methods, which, you know, really oftentimes it's indigenous artists and scholars and folks who are really kind of offering this way into really kind of radically rethinking the kind of naturalized way that we approach material in this moment, which is of course a kind of like, continues to be a kind of like patriarchal, imperialist, colonial, petro-capitalist reality, right? So, and in that reality, we approach land and we approach time in certain ways. And yeah, so in my work, in this work and in other work, I'm especially working with the material of sand, which is, of course, comes from the land, but I'm kind of thinking about the ways that this material has been kind of, it is totally central to how we lead our contemporary lives. I mean, here we are in this city and we're kind of surrounded, you know, here we are on a concrete floor and surrounded by buildings that are really made of sand. They're made of, sand is a primary component in concrete and in glass. And it's a material that's been used in certain ways to kind of, you know, build our built world and build our cities. So in such a way that kind of has us tied to, you know, unsustainable, impossible, like modes of productivity, the kind of speed through which we need to move through our days. The kind of ableism that's kind of written into the material, but it's also, again, it's contradictory, the ways that it also makes access possible. And so, yeah, I've learned a lot from kind of thinking through land-based methods, which really has us attuning back to all of these kind of forces that are embedded in this land, which encompasses kind of everything, that teaches us so much about actually the ways that materials kind of can be honored and kind of reciprocally worked with. You know, I think about the way that sand is both, you know, again, as I said, it's contradictory, that it's both kind of thought of as something that's completely mundane. It's something to not really think about, but it also is sort of magic. You know, it's kind of both things at once. And it also holds time in a specific way that should probably teach us how to work with it. You know, the sand that we can use in building is actually formed through, like, you know, deep time, and it's formed through the kind of interaction of rock and water specifically. Not all sand actually is equal. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting to me that we're sort of in, you know, in this reality where we work with a material like that is absolutely everywhere. And it's so everywhere that we don't pay attention to it. It's kind of invisibilized in a way again. And for me, that invisibilization is doing a lot, and it's keeping us trapped in kind of certain ways of building our world, but also more widely than that, certain ways of kind of relating to one another. So yeah, these methods really are kind of core to my work, and through them I've really been thinking about actually the ways that both in, you know, my process as a kind of maker or as an artist, but also in the way that I'm kind of sharing the work and the way that work unfolds with a viewer, that what it's maybe doing at its very best is sort of re-sensitizing us to aspects of the world that have been invisibilized. So maybe, you know, in other works I'm working on, you might actually like feel the presence of sand. You might actually be touching it. Or in the context of the blinds, you know, I'm sort of, it's very material work. It's very bodily, that you're maybe kind of looking again at these kind of mundane surfaces and thinking about them differently or noticing them. And I think that that's kind of a first step. Yeah, it's so interesting always to answer a question like this. Yes, I'm working on, I'm in this kind of interesting moment right now where I feel that there are new kind of bodies of work that are emerging. They're too new for me to tell you everything about them yet because I don't entirely know what they will be. But I will say that I'm really continuing to work with marbling prints. I think they're just like endlessly interesting and incredible to me. And I'm really working with sand, working with dust as well. So those things will be forthcoming. I should be presenting a show later this summer in Montreal with Patel Brown, hopefully. And so we'll see exactly what emerges then. Yeah. And other shows that I'm supposed to do. So we'll see. But I'm in this moment where I'm really excited to kind of pick up on a lot of the threads that are existing in my work, but I feel like all this kind of energy about, maybe some new kind of forms that are coming out of these, existing bodies of work.